Pace fishing for me started something like 20 years ago. In fact, I think I was one of the first anglers that realised how really wet, sloppy pace, how good it was. I experimented through the years with drier pace and ground bait pace, but for me, the most effective way of fishing it was to get it really sloppy. It's changed a lot through the years, and when I say change, it's not just the way the angler fishes it, but the way the fish see it and have wised up through it. How it started with me was fishing with meat paste through a riddle. I used to push a luncheon meat through a middle and make it really fine, and then add water to it to get it really sloppy. And it really was unbeatable. I had a few years of it where I was unbeatable. You know, I got it all to myself, using a pot on the end of the pole, not swinging it out like the other anglers were doing at the time. And because it was wet under the water, that was how the fish was seeing your loose feed as well. So they was eating that readily, and the fish was just taking the sloppy paste like it was just bait you'd fed in by hand. But over the years, the fish have wised up to a certain degree to this sloppy paste, although they always eat it like they always have done. They really like it, but they had this tendency to bash it off the hook. Because it's so wet, it's very easy for a fish just to bash it with its tail or any part of its body, even its mouth, and blow it off the hook, not taking the hook. So I'm down here today with a new paste from Sonu called Pro Paste. And what that does, it's a really sticky paste. And to be fair, it's quite difficult to fish with it dry because it is so sticky and it sticks to your fingers. But there's ways of getting around that by using a lot of water. Always have a bowl of water on your tray and wash your fingers as you're using it. And you'll catch a lot of fish using it fairly dry. But again, through the years, I've noticed quite dramatically that sloppy paste is the way to go. You know, it's just like the feed you fed in the peg. It's gone all watery on the bottom and they're eating that. So that's the reason why sloppy paste is the best, I believe. And the reason why that's better than previous paste is because it can be mixed really sloppy because of its sticky nature, and it can stay on the hook for longer when it's on the bottom of the lake. You can have it really, really sloppy, nearly like water, because the makeup is so sticky that it gives you longer on the bottom of the lake to wait for a bite. You can see my floats dancing up and down. Some are liners, some are small fish. But on normal pace, that's enough to waft the hook out of the paste, which means you'd have to come in and rebait again. But I'd say you've got, depending on the fish activity in your peg, you've got around about 5 minutes before you're going to have to rebait. If you've not had a bite in that time, you've got 5 minutes to fish it out until you have to come back and rebait. You can see my float's just lifted up slightly there, so that tells me, because I'm fishing dead depth, it's time to come in and rebait. One of the tricks I've been doing here at the Glebe, I've had some really good weights on this Pro Paste, but rather than just use it on its own, it can be used on its own, but because I like to hand feed heavily with 2mm soaked pellets, which have been prepared in a way just like you would prepare them for the feeder, just put the dry pellets in a bait box and level them with water and wait an hour for them to soak it in. They get really heavy, and that way they sink faster. So by just fishing short, after every fish or every time I come back to rebait, I throw 2 small handfuls in a general area. Really accurate feeding isn't really the game with pace fishing. You're trying to attract a lot of fish in a quite wide area, but every time you drop your paste in, that needs to be accurate. So I'm lining up with a marker on the far bank with the pole on my elbow. So the way I go about fishing this pro paste is, again, I mentioned it before, it's got to be sloppy for me. The dry paste just don't really cut it. You know, the fish are wised up to something dry on the bottom of the lake. You want something sloppy, which is what your loose feed is emulating. So the way I go about baiting it up is I've got a bowl full of really sloppy pro paste, but rather than just use that on their own, I like to mix it with my heavy 2mm that I've previously soaked, which will continue to dry it out slightly as you're fishing. So your bowl of water serves two processes on your side tray, which is essential really, else you're going to get really sticky and messy. You can see I've been fishing for about an hour now. I'm not dirty in any way. My leggings are reasonably clean. They're not even wet, although I've caught quite a few fish already. But your water is there really just to wash up after you've put the bait on, and also carry on wetting up your paste as you're fishing. Because although they've been soaked, these 2mm, they will absorb water out of the really sloppy pro paste. And just, you know, fiddle it with a bit with your fingers and get it all mixed together, your 2mm in with your paste, until you get a reasonably sloppy ball like that. But that isn't sloppy enough in my book. You need it wetter. So it's beginning to stick to my fingers there, like you can see, but just by dipping it in the water and bringing it out a few times, starts to get it really, really sloppy. And then all I do is just dent the paste, make an indent in the paste with your thumb, and then press the hook right the way in the middle. It's really a one-handed process. You don't really want to be getting it on your hand if you're right-handed that you hold the pole. You want to keep everything clean. And just with the fingers of the hand that you've picked the paste up with, just gather it all together in a nice big ball. And again, I've dipped it in water twice here, but really that still isn't sloppy enough for me. And that's the beauty of the pro paste. You can get it really, really sloppy, and it gives you up to 5 minutes fishing time after you've potted it in your peg. So just before I put it in my paste pot, I'm going to dip it in the water once more. So it's really got a slimy wet coating. That is really wet now. And I'm just going to gently put it in my pot. And you can see I've got some, still it's really wet and it's not sticky anymore because it's so wet. But before I ship my pole out, I'm just going to dip my hand in the water again. It's really essential that. And I've got a really nice clean hand. All right, it's wet, you can't avoid that. And making sure the rig's all together, it's not tangling in any way. I can ship out to the general area. I say the general area is where my loose feed's been going in. But every time I go in, I'm using a far bank marker with the pole on the end, on the elbow, and dropping it in exactly the same inch perfect spot where I've been catching my fish, just like that. I'm fishing it dead depth, so when the paste, see that there, just get a slight indication as the paste hits the bottom and I'm ready for a bite. You'll see by looking at the bristle, I'm getting quite a few taps. There's not that many fish there at the moment. I'm waiting. Normally on these commercials these days, the last 2 hours, 2 or 3 hours are the best time to be fishing paste. Normally I'm fishing a feeder on this venue in the early hours of the match. But I'm getting quite a few indications. They're not really burying the float. They're just the carp possibly feeding on bits of the paste on the lake bed as well as hoovering the 2mm up. But what I'm waiting for is a few sharp stabs before the float zips under in a really positive bite. Sorry to interrupt, but I find it really important that we need to know how to mix this paste because it is on the sticky side. You can use it dry, like I've mentioned, but for me, it's got to be wet. The wetter the better, definitely with paste. Just because the fish are wising up, even as we speak. Through the years, they've learnt to sort of be very cautious around dry paste. So the first step with this pro paste is I'm going to mix half a bag full. It's really something you don't need to use a lot of. It comes in quite small bags for that reason, because I like to add the particles I'm feeding as well, whether it's ground bait, pellets, corn or bigger pellets, you know, so that's part of the paste as well. It's just not the pro paste. So for this demo, I'm going to do half a bag. So there it is, the powder, and really what you want to be doing now is adding plenty of water to it and stirring it at the same time. So get in there with your fingers, but don't get it dry at any time. You can see I've put lots and lots of water with that there, and you might say that I've over wetted that, which I have for now, but it's like most ground baits, it keeps absorbing, you know, soon after you've put the water with. And you can see now straight away my fingers in that. I'm still fairly clean. I can just dip my fingers in the water to clean them. But if you're trying to mix this dry on the other hand, you're going to get into problems with it being really sticky and making a mess of your hands. So keep it wet at all times. And you can see now it's really beginning to not really stiffen up, but it's getting firmer. A few more minutes and it'll be time to add a bit more water, but keep it wet at all times. That's the best advice I can hand out at this moment. So it's drying up a bit now, so I'm going to add a bit more water to it, just a bit now. You know, I'm not really saturating it, and mixing it so it was wet before I added that water, and that needs to be, don't let it dry out after you've put a lot of water with it and then add some more, because it would have already started setting, and then you could still wet it up, but you need to use a bit more action to get it really wet all the way through. Yeah, it's got a nice smell to the angler. It's not a horrible smell, this. It smells nearly good enough to eat, to be fair. Not that I'm going to try and eat it, but it's starting to go stiffer again. So before it goes really stiff, keep adding the water. Don't be afraid to put plenty of water in it and get it all mixing round again. Make it really, really wet. All evenly, nearly like a really thick soup, that is at the minute. But again, it's sticking to my hand slightly, but it's drying up all the time. So I just need to dip my hand in the water to clean it off again and add a bit more water, and that should be about it mixed. It shouldn't take, I've been mixing here for a few minutes now, and in that time it's been absorbing the water I've put in, and it shouldn't really take on a lot more water. That is really how it wants to look when it's on your bait tray. I like to put 2 mils with my paste. You could put anything, you could dry it up with a bit of ground bait if you're really confident with a ground bait that you've been catching lots of fish on. But for me, it's 2 mils. So I've mixed it that wet for this reason. So what I'm going to do now, I like to put round about 50-50 quantity of paste and 2 mils together. So what I like to do is just, because these have been soaked, by the way, and they're like ready for like if you wanted to fish the feeder, but they're dry to the touch, so they will keep absorbing water once they're in the paste, and that's going to dry it up a bit. So that is why I put plenty of water with that. But having said that, if I just put that on my bait tray and started fishing, within 15 minutes that would go quite a bit firmer. Too firm to fish with it. You'd have to put a bit more water with it. So I'm going to add plenty of 2 mils with it, and at the same time get them mixed in there, because the reason for this, and it's really important, I'm feeding the peg really heavy by hand with these 2 mils. I'm throwing them in quite generous quantities, trying to get competition in the peg by these big fish. So they're naturally hoovering these up on the bottom. So a paste, I always recommend the paste you use wants to be very similar to what you're feeding, and then that way they take it without a lot of caution. So I'm going to keep adding around about 50% of 2 mils to 50% of paste, and you'll see by mixing this together, and you'll need the water to wash your hands now and again, it begins to stiffen up, ready for fishing with. It's not quite, it's probably 30% 2 mils in there, so I need another 20%. But whenever you go into your other bait, just give your hands a bit of a swirl in the water, and then you'll find that they won't stick to your hand. And it's just a way of keeping yourself clean. You know, you don't want it all the way up your pole and on your leggings. I'm really clean for a paste angler. I've got a bit on my hand, but all that is, you know, and you're clean again. So just work that in, not too much, because over time the 2 mils will go down into a ground bait, which you don't really want. You want particles in the paste, and I think just about now I'm about half and half, 50% 2 mils and 50% paste. But you can see, because I've added them 2 mils, which are drier than the paste was, it's beginning to go quite firm and it's getting really sticky again. So what I need to do now, you can do this when you're actually fishing rather than mixing it initially, is I've got this on my bait tray, I've got this water this side of my paste, so that every time I go in to pick my paste up, I dip my hand in the water first and then pick a nice big ball of paste up. And for my sort of way of fish paste these days, to catch these wary carp, that's too dry, even though I put that much water with it. So you just use the water just to swill it in with that one hand. Don't try and use this hand, because that's the hand that uses your pole, so you're going to get it all up your pole. Try and use your left hand if you're right-handed, and just keep dipping it in the water and wetting it up just like the way you'd want it. And that's about it. I've dipped it in the water 3 times. I've made the hole for the hook. That goes in there, patching it up with the same hand, and one last dip in the water, and then that can go in my paste pot, ready for a nice big fish. You can tell the paste is still on there because the float's fairly low, and what drift there is on the lake is keeping me in touch with the paste. I'm still getting a few little taps and liners, but again I'm waiting for that quick zip under of the float. And now it's popped up just that bit, and it's beginning to track through a bit, so that tells me I need to come back and rebait. Rather than fishing a top kit +1 here today, I'm trying to sort of get the fish that, what makes paste fishing easier for you is fishing it close in shallow water. As long as the fish are confident to come that close to you. Other times you need to fish further out. So just for today's example, I'm fishing a top kit +1, but rather than every time I come back to bait up, I'm not taking the pole apart, I'm just coming back in one, and this speeds you up because it is a bit of a rhythm method this. You're not getting a fish every chuck, by no means. You're getting one once every 5 at the moment, that's what it's working out. But what I'm trying to do is create a rhythm that gets the fish feeding in competition with the other fish there. So they lose a bit of caution that way, and they rush about trying to beat the mates to the bait, and you know, they can take your bait with more confidence that way. So again, what I'm doing to bait up, my hand's really clean from the last time I baited up. I'm going in with a wet hand, so it's not going to stick to my fingers in any way, and I'm picking up a really good size, you know, to fit. I'm using a new soft cad paste pot, which is quite a wide bore, so that's what I'm using. I'm using the size piece of paste that will fit nicely in that when it's made up. So what I need to do now is dip that in water to get it really wet, make the indent and push the hook right so you can feel the hook in the hand you've picked the paste up with, and just by using this hand without getting the other hand sticky and messy, just gather it together and then dip it back in the water a few times, and then it can go in the paste pot. just make sure I've got my keep net arms here. Sometimes if there's any wind about it can blow the line under there and it can rip your paste off without you knowing it. So just make sure your rig's nice and loose and not going to tangle. And then I can go out. I don't have to put another section on my pole because I explained that earlier, and it can speed you up and get a bit of competition in the peg, hopefully to get a bite quickly. Every time I go out, you can use your float as a marker. I'm throwing quite a few soaked 2 mils because, you know, I'm expecting to catch some nice big fish here, and you're not really going to catch them just by going in with paste on its own. When the water's warm, they need additional feeding. You know, you want to get them down there, grubbing about for the 2 mils. Once they're on the 2 mils, I believe they're not going to go away. You know, they'll stay, the 2 mils are on the bottom, get trapped in the bottom, and that makes the fish stay there, searching them out. You see how low the float is at the moment? I'm getting a few taps and liners, but again, I'm waiting for that fast bite. That looked a bit like a bite then, but it wasn't, because I hear a lot of anglers complaining about pace fishing. They've probably not done a lot of pace fishing, and they complain about missing a lot of bites. Well, I don't think you're actually missing any bites when you're pace fishing. When it goes under, you miss it, and that's just simply a liner or a small fish, which you're not really targeting anyway. A proper pace bite, we all strike because it's just a reaction, but most of the time I think you could just leave it, which you have done in the past, and the fish will just tow your rig away. So the indications that you think are bites that you're missing are simply just liners. And I've always believed that from quite a few years ago actually now. So, you know, you feed, all right, you're feeding a lot of bait by fishing quite quickly with these big lumps of paste, but you still need the additional feed, because your target fish are sort of 7 or 8 pounds, sometimes even bigger, and they, when the water's warm, they can get through a lot of bait, and you need, as I said earlier, you need that competition going on in your peg, which brings more and more fish in, and they're trying to beat each other to the bait. There's indications straight away there, and there I've got a fish. I could see that fish, it was just feeding on the bait as soon as it went in, and it probably, because what I've been saying about the competition, it wanted to beat its mate to eat that ball of paste, and it's took it more or less as soon as the paste is at the bottom there. Feels a good fish as well, going to me right. Fishing on this venue, I say there's a lot of big fish in here, and I've always got a spare section behind me because some rip off towards the middle of the lake, and although I'm fishing really strong tackle here, you do need to follow them out if they decide to go for a run. So it's always a good idea to have a spare section behind you, but this is under control now. Feels a good fish. So using a puller kit, I'm on 17 Duraslip today, a nice heavy elastic that suits the size 10 hook I've got on, XSHB paste hook, with a size 1 self-cocking paste float. Whoa, nice splash. I just keep the fish under control, keep your pole low until it's ready for the net, and then that way it finds it hard to take off. If you've got your pole high, then it can run further out, but keeping it low, it's just fighting against the elastic like this. And rather than try and play the fish over, because we're fishing short, it's really in a playing area when we catch a fish. So try and get it to one side so it's not disturbing your peg. And because it's quite an old fish, this, I think, the way it's fighting, it won't be long before it's in the net. But it's a good fish. It's getting on for about £10. no rush really, just the elastic's doing the work, tiring out the fish, and there it is. So lift the landing net up. Oh, it is heavy, that is. Supported by my knees, and size 10 barbless hook comes out really easy, just like so. And he's been caught a few times, this fish, got a bit of a blunt nose, but typical pace fish really. They've all seen it before and wised up, but he slipped up. So there you go, Pro Paste. It's been doing the business for me on the glebe just recently. I've had some really big weights on it. So there you go.